The Galactic Council sat in a grand hall, their council chambers filled with the hushed murmurs of intergalactic leaders from all corners of the galaxy. At the front stood a human diplomat, a calm figure in a black military uniform, their face expressionless as they stared out at the sea of alien faces. The diplomat spoke with a firm voice that carried across the chamber. "We, the human race, demand that you listen carefully. The soul expanse is under our protection. If you do not respect that, there will be consequences." The words hung in the air, thick with tension. A few leaders looked uneasy, but many more exchanged glances, dismissing the warning. The human diplomat finished speaking and sat down, the message delivered. The council's attention shifted to the next matter on the agenda, and no one paid the warning any further thought. Across the room, a member of the Selver Empire, a tall, intimidating being with piercing yellow eyes, laughed. His name was Grand Admiral HFY, and he was known for his arrogance and contempt for humans. He had seen their kind as weak, no different from any other primitive species in the galaxy. They had no advanced technology, no great fleet, no real power. "What foolishness," HFY muttered under his breath, leaning over to speak with a fellow council member. "These humans think their little expanse can stop us. They are nothing. Weak. Primitive." The other Excelver present nodded in agreement, their sneers evident. Humans were seen as insignificant, a species that had barely gained a foothold in the galaxy. The thought of a race so small and insignificant trying to command such power was laughable. Despite the warning, the Selver Empire had no intention of turning back. They had their sights set on the human territories, especially the planet Earth, which had long been a symbol of pride and wealth in human space. A few weeks later, the Excelver fleet, an imposing armada of battle cruisers and warships, entered human-controlled space. They advanced towards the Sol expanse, dismissing all attempts at communication with the humans. The fleet's commanders, fueled by confidence, saw nothing standing in their way. They believed it would be a simple conquest, a matter of months at most before human resistance crumbled. But as the Excelver fleet made its way deeper into human territory, strange things began to happen. Their sensors began to glitch, showing odd readings that made no sense. Fleet engineers scrambled to make sense of the malfunctions, but no one could explain the oddities. The Excelver ships seemed to have entered a strange pocket of space where their technology struggled to function correctly. They were deep within the human-controlled zone now, and nothing about the situation felt right. Then, a sudden, sharp signal cut through the airwaves. It wasn't a simple distress call, nor was it a message from the fleet's own ships. No, this was something else entirely. A single, clear human transmission blasted through the Excelver fleet's communication channels, loud and unmistakable. "You were warned." It was a cold, emotionless message, the voice robotic and metallic, as though it was coming from an artificial intelligence. But what struck the Selver most was the terrifying certainty in the words. The message was not a threat or a plea. It was a statement. The humans knew they had arrived. The humans were ready for them. As the message played over and over again in the communication systems, the Selver fleet was suddenly struck by an invisible force. Without warning, powerful shockwaves tore through the ships, jamming their weapon systems and disabling many of their engines. Panic set in as some of the smaller warships began to explode in bursts of fire. The Excelver fleet was being attacked, but from where? No human ships appeared on their radar. No sign of any enemy. But then, out of nowhere, dozens of massive human warships emerged from the shadows, rising from hidden stations deep within the Sol expanse. Their weapons unleashed hell upon the Excelver fleet, launching waves of precision strikes. The Excelver, though technologically advanced, found themselves completely unprepared for the kind of warfare humanity had brought. This was not a conventional battle. It was a trap set by humans who had known they would come. Grand Admiral HFY watched in disbelief as his once mighty fleet was decimated, His ships were no match for the strategic genius of the humans. No matter how fast they tried to retreat, the human ships cut them off, driving them further into the heart of human space. The HFY had underestimated the human resolve, and now they were paying the price. "Get us out of here," Kashol bellowed, his voice full of fear and disbelief. "Full retreat. Now." But the humans were relentless. They knew how to fight, and they knew how to win. The Grand Admiral's pleas went unanswered as his flagship, the mighty Valkyr, was struck with a devastating blow. The ship's shields failed, and the vessel was torn apart by the sheer power of human weapons. The warning had been clear, but now it was too late. The human diplomat's words echoed in the back of Kashol's mind as he watched his fleet crumble to nothing. "You were warned." The HFY fleet, once so confident and unstoppable, now found itself scrambling for survival. In the aftermath of the surprise attack, chaos reigned. Their once pristine warships were littered with debris, and the terrifying silence that followed the destruction was punctuated only by the crackling of damaged communication systems. Fleet commanders desperately tried to regain control of their ships, but it was as if the very fabric of their technology had turned against them. Grand Admiral Kashol stood at the command center of his flagship, watching helplessly as the chaos unfolded around him. His ships, supposed to be the epitome of HFY superiority, were being torn apart by weapons they couldn't even comprehend. The human fleet, with its sleek, terrifying ships, moved like shadows, striking with deadly precision before vanishing back into the darkness. "We must retreat," Kashol barked at his officers, but his orders were met with no response. They were being cut off from all sides. It was clear that the humans had anticipated their every move. It was no longer a battle. It was a slaughter. Outside, the human warships were relentless. They moved in tight formations, their weapons firing in perfect synchrony. The first wave of HFY ships that had been hit by the initial barrage were already engulfed in flames, their hulls breaking apart as human missiles found their marks. The human fleet didn't hesitate. They didn't pause to take a victory lap. They were focused, as if they had been planning this for years. "Fire!" Kashol shouted, his voice strained with panic. His fleet's remaining ships launched their counterattacks, but the humans were always one step ahead. Missiles whizzed past human ships, missing their targets by miles. Energy blasts fired from the HFY ships fizzled out against advanced human shields, barely causing a dent in their assault. The humans were not giving them an inch. A HFY cruiser, a massive ship with dozens of guns mounted across its hull, tried to make a break for it, moving at full speed in an attempt to escape the battle. But before it could make it more than a few light years, a human ship appeared directly in its path. The human ship was a battle cruiser, its black hull gleaming in the distance like a predator waiting to strike. Without a word, the human ship fired a devastating volley of energy blasts, each one finding its target with terrifying accuracy. The HFY cruiser exploded into a brilliant flash of light, its wreckage scattering across the cold void of space. Kashol's mind raced. This was not the war he had been expecting. He had anticipated a battle of strength, a clash of superior weaponry. But instead, he was facing an enemy who fought with strategy, precision, and an almost uncanny understanding of how to exploit the weaknesses of their opponents. The humans were not just defending their space. They were systematically dismantling the HFY empire. "Admiral," one of his officers said, their voice trembling, "we've lost contact with nearly half the fleet. Our engines are failing. We can't escape." Kashol gritted his teeth. This was worse than he had imagined. It was as though the very fabric of his fleet was coming apart. They had underestimated humanity, and now the consequences were clear. Suddenly, a transmission came through, and the HFY flagship's communications officer quickly patched it through. It was a single human voice, calm and cold. "We warned you," it said. The message sent a chill down Kashol's spine. It was a simple statement, but the weight of it was immense. The humans had known this moment would come. They had planned for it. They had prepared for it. And now, their enemies were paying the price for their arrogance. Another blast rocked the flagship, causing the entire bridge to shake. Cashel stumbled as the room was thrown into disarray. His officers scrambled to hold their positions, but it was clear that the situation was slipping beyond control. The flagship was badly damaged, and the crew was struggling to maintain even basic functions. "We need to get out of here," Cashel shouted, trying to regain some semblance of control. But as he glanced at the view screen, his heart sank. Dozens of human ships had surrounded the HFY fleet, forming a near-impenetrable blockade. Every attempt to retreat had been cut off. The humans weren't just fighting to defend their space. They were hunting them down, one ship at a time. The flagship's engines sputtered as they tried to power up, but it was useless. The ship was dead in space. "We are surrounded, Admiral," one of the officers said in disbelief. "We can't escape. It's over." Cashel's mind raced. How could this happen? How could they, the mighty HFY, be brought to the brink of defeat by these humans? They had underestimated them. No, they had dismissed them. And now, the Empire was paying the price for that arrogance. A final wave of missiles launched from a human cruiser, and Cashel watched in horror as they sped toward his flagship. The last thing he saw before the explosion consumed everything was the cold, calculating face of the human commander who had orchestrated it all. The warning had been ignored. The human empire would not let them forget that mistake. The destruction of the HFY fleet was only the beginning. The human response had been swift and brutal, and as the last remnants of the alien invaders scattered across space, a chilling silence descended. But for the HFY, it was no longer just a defeat. It was the beginning of their utter annihilation. As the news of the attack spread, panic began to set in within the HFY Empire. The elite warlords and high-ranking officers, once so confident in their superiority, now scrambled to make sense of the chaos. For the first time in centuries, the once dominant empire was left in a state of disarray. The truth was undeniable. The humans were not the weak, insignificant race they had assumed them to be. They were warriors, cunning and resourceful, and they had made it clear that any further attempts to violate their space would be met with an iron fist. Back on Earth, the supreme commander of the human military, General Lyra Vasquez, watched the reports come in from the front lines. The destruction of the HFY fleet had been decisive, but the battle was far from over. She knew that HFY would retaliate. They were a proud species, and their defeat would not go unanswered. But what they didn't know was that humanity had already prepared for this moment. The human fleet, now bolstered by the successful destruction of the HFY forces, moved deeper into the heart of enemy territory. Earth's forces had set up a network of hidden stations within the Sol expanse, powerful military outposts disguised as harmless asteroid fields or abandoned space stations. These bases were the key to humanity's counteroffensive, well hidden, armed to the teeth, and ready to strike at a moment's notice. Within the HFY capital, Emperor Karak sat in his massive throne room, his face twisted in fury and disbelief. His empire, once the unchallenged ruler of the stars, was now on the verge of collapse. The human assault had struck not just at their fleets, but at the very heart of their power. One by one, their colonies had fallen to the relentless advance of the human forces. Zelvar Prime, their homeworld, was now the only place that still held any semblance of order. But even that was not safe. The HFY Emperor had hoped to rally his people, to re-establish control over his shattered empire. But there was a growing realization among his advisors that his power was slipping. The human forces were everywhere. They were closing in, cutting off escape routes, and eliminating every fleet they encountered. There was no retreat, no safe haven. "They have wiped out our colonies," one of his generals spoke, his voice trembling with fear. "Our fleet has been decimated. We no longer control the space we once did. The humans, They are everywhere. Enough! Emperor Karak roared, slamming his fist onto the armrest of his throne. His anger was palpable, but even he could not ignore the truth. The HFY were losing, and they were losing quickly. The galaxy they had once ruled with an iron grip was slipping away from their control, and it was becoming increasingly clear that humanity was behind the wheel. "Send out every ship we have left," Karak ordered, his voice filled with a twisted resolve. "We will not go quietly. We will make a stand on HFY Prime. We will crush them, even if it takes every last soldier." But deep within the human ranks, a far darker decision had already been made. General Vasquez had ordered a final, irreversible strategy. The human fleet, now stronger than ever, would no longer be content with simple defense. They would make their presence known once and for all. And the HFY Empire would never be the same. From deep within the Sol expanse, hidden human warships began to emerge. They were not just any warships. They were the pinnacle of human technology, designed specifically for one purpose: destruction. These ships were equipped with devastating new weapons that could wipe out entire cities with a single blast. They were the culmination of years of research, military strategies, and untold sacrifices. And now, they were unleashed upon the HFY. HFY Prime, the proud jewel of their empire, stood at the center of their last defense. It was a massive planet, filled with towering cities, advanced technology, and millions of HFY citizens. The HFY believed they could hold their ground here, that this would be the final battlefield. But as the human ships closed in on the planet, a sense of dread began to seep through the ranks of the HFY defenders. They could feel the end coming. As the first human warship broke through the outer atmosphere of HFY Prime, the air grew thick with tension. The HFY had set up a defense network around their planet, a final line of defense that they believed was impenetrable. But the humans were prepared. They had anticipated this. The HFY defense network began to activate, massive energy shields surrounding the planet, designed to deflect any incoming assault. But the human fleet had something far more devastating in mind. From the dark reaches of space, human ships launched a new kind of weapon: Dreadnought-class bombs that detonated with the force of 100 nuclear explosions. They were specifically designed to pierce through the HFY's shields and shatter their defenses. The first bomb hit the energy shield of HFY Prime and exploded in a cataclysmic burst. The shield flickered, weakened by the blast, and then failed. The following bombs rained down, creating shockwaves that shook the very foundation of the planet. The HFY forces scrambled to counterattack, but it was too late. In a matter of hours, HFY Prime was burning. The once proud planet, home to an empire that had stretched across the stars, was consumed by the fury of humanity's wrath. Cities were leveled, and the capital, once a symbol of HFY might, was reduced to rubble. The human fleet showed no mercy, their mission clear: eradicate the threat. As the final moments of the HFY Empire unfolded before them, General Vasquez stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the planet burn. She had known that this would come to pass. The HFY had ignored their warning. They had underestimated humanity. Now, the galaxy would remember the price of that mistake. Humanity had sent a message, loud and clear, and it was one that would echo across the stars for millennia. The HFY had fallen. The days following the fall of HFY Prime were filled with eerie silence. The last remnants of the HFY Empire had been crushed in the blink of an eye, and the galaxy, once filled with the sounds of war and the ambitions of mighty empires, now lay in a quiet, unsettling calm. The HFY, who had once ruled over vast stretches of space with a terrifying grip, were gone, wiped out by the relentless fury of humanity. On Earth, celebrations erupted across the planet. Humanity had struck a blow to one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy, and there was no doubt that the people were proud. But the human leaders, those who had orchestrated the destruction of the HFY, knew that this victory, While monumental was not the end, it was only the beginning of a much larger mission, one that had been set in motion from the very moment that HFY decided to invade. The Supreme Commander, General Lyra Vasquez, stood in the dimly lit war room of the Earth Command Center. Maps and holograms flickered in the air around her as she watched the reports come in. The HFY were gone, yes, but there were still many questions left unanswered. Who else in the galaxy might seek to challenge humanity? What other empires, emboldened by the fall of one of their own, might now turn their sights toward Earth? The human military had already begun preparations for the next phase of their plan. The destruction of the HFY had not been just a reaction to an invasion. It had been a statement, a warning to the galaxy. General Vasquez knew that there would be other species who would see the fall of the HFY as an opportunity to strike. But humanity had already considered that possibility. The human race had grown stronger over the years, building an empire of its own, one built on strength, resilience, and unity. But the galaxy had yet to understand the full scope of humanity's resolve. In the months that followed, humanity began systematically dismantling what remained of the HFY's technological assets. Research teams scoured the wreckage of destroyed ships, scouring every corner of the HFY's vast armadas. The advanced technology they had left behind would not go to waste. With it, humanity's engineers began developing weapons far beyond anything the galaxy had seen. But it was not only technology that the humans were after. They were studying the very psyche of the HFY, learning from their mistakes, understanding their pride, their arrogance, and how they had come to be defeated. The first real sign that other galactic empires were taking notice came when a fleet from the Thraxan coalition arrived at the edges of the Sol expanse. They were a proud, warrior-like race known for their brutal strength and their disdain for any species they deemed weaker than themselves. The Thraxans had always respected the HFY, and now, with their empire destroyed, the Thraxans saw an opening to expand their own borders. The human fleets were quick to intercept the Thraxan ships. General Vasquez ordered the fleet to remain in position and await their approach. The Thraxans, thinking they could intimidate humanity the same way the HFY had once done, underestimated Earth's readiness. As the Thraxan ships moved into range, their commander, a towering muscular alien named Grothar, transmitted a message. His voice was low, filled with the deep, growling tones of his species. "Humans," he spat, "you have destroyed the HFY. But do not think for a moment that you can stand in our way. We will not be as weak as they were." General Vasquez stood tall, her face unflinching. She didn't respond with threats or words of bravado. Instead, she simply gave the order. The human ships, equipped with new technologies scavenged from the HFY wreckage, powered up their weapon systems. In an instant, the Thraxan ships found themselves locked in a web of devastating energy beams, pulse cannons, and missile strikes. The human ships moved like a swarm, their tactics a calculated dance of destruction. The Thraxans, though powerful in their own right, were caught off guard by the precision and speed with which humanity responded. Grothar's flagship, a monstrous vessel built to withstand even the heaviest of assaults, was torn apart by concentrated fire from a human destroyer. As the Thraxan fleet attempted to regroup, they realized something they had never anticipated. Humanity fought with an intelligence, a will to win, that they had never encountered before. The Thraxan leader's pride was shattered in the blink of an eye. The message that humanity had sent was clear. They had destroyed the HFY, and now they were prepared to face any threat, no matter how large or how powerful. Grothar, wounded and humiliated, transmitted his final message. We surrender," he said, his voice filled with bitter defeat. "The Thraxans have no quarrel with the humans. We leave your space. We will not challenge you again." The human fleet did not chase them, but it did not let them go unscathed either. The Thraxans were forced to turn and retreat, and as they did, they knew they had been defeated not just by weapons, but by something far more terrifying, the human spirit. As the Thraxan ships disappeared into the distance, General Vasquez stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking out at the stars. She had known that humanity's victory over the HFY would not be the end of their journey. But what had just transpired? This defeat of the Thraxans was not a fluke. It was proof that humanity was not just a defender in the galaxy. They were now a force to be reckoned with. The galaxy would never again underestimate humanity. The warning had been clear, and it had been heard. But as the human fleet prepared to move forward, General Vasquez knew that there was still much work to be done. The fall of the HFY was a victory, but it was also a signal to all other species in the galaxy. The humans had not only won their right to exist, they had proven that they would not allow any other empire to dominate them. Humanity was no longer a race to be ignored. They were now a force that would shape the future of the galaxy. And there was no turning back from that. The void of space stretched infinitely, a silent witness to the shifting balance of power in the galaxy. The once mighty HFY Empire had been reduced to ashes, and the Thraxans had learned a painful lesson about underestimating humanity. But the humans knew better than to rest on their victories. War had a way of attracting opportunists. Deep in the outer regions of the galaxy, whispers of humanity's rise spread like wildfire. Some species were terrified. Others were intrigued, and a select few saw an opportunity. One such faction was the Varax Syndicate, a ruthless, nomadic empire of mercenaries, slavers and warlords who thrived in the chaos left behind by fallen civilizations. For centuries, the Varax had operated in the shadows, selling their services to the highest bidder, scavenging remnants of collapsed empires, and expanding their influence through violence and subjugation. Where others saw destruction, they saw profit. And now, with the HFY wiped out and the Thraxans humiliated, they saw humanity as their next target, not as an empire to challenge, but as a resource to exploit. The first sign of their approach came when a human colony on the outskirts of the Sol Expanse went dark. General Lyra Vasquez stood at the command deck of the flagship Indomitable, reviewing the last transmission from Colony Theta 9. The visuals were grainy, but the horror was unmistakable. Fires raged through the colony streets, buildings were reduced to rubble, and the last image captured showed massive warships descending from the sky, ships unlike anything humanity had encountered before. The Varax, Vasquez muttered, recognizing their distinct markings. Her second-in-command, Admiral Jonas Reed, stood beside her, his jaw clenched. They didn't come to conquer. They came to take. The Varax were infamous for their brutal efficiency. They didn't waste resources on drawn-out wars. Instead, they struck fast, taking prisoners, looting valuable technology, and vanishing before a proper counterattack could be launched. By the time anyone responded, they were already gone, leaving only destruction in their wake. But this time, they had made a grave mistake. They had taken humans. A silence settled over the war room as the implications became clear. The Varax had no idea what they had just unleashed. General Vasquez turned to her officers. "Locate their fleet. I want to know where they've taken our people." Her words carried an unspoken promise. This will not stand. The search took days, but humanity's intelligence networks had grown stronger since the HFY war. Using long-range scans and intercepted transmissions, they tracked the Varax fleet to a desolate star system on the edge of the galactic frontier. It was an unclaimed region, lawless and filled with debris from ancient wars. Perfect territory for a group like the Varax. As the human fleet prepared for departure, Vasquez addressed her troops. She stood before the assembled soldiers, her voice steady, unwavering. "The Varaxes think we are like the others, that we will mourn our losses and retreat. They are wrong." Her eyes burned with intensity. "They have taken our people, and we will bring them back, alive or in vengeance." The fleet jumped to hyperspace. When they arrived, the scene before them was worse than expected. Massive Varax warships, shaped like jagged metal fangs, loomed over a barren planet, their engines glowing an eerie green. Below, human prisoners were being herded into containment cells, shackled and beaten by their captors. The Varaks had no idea that their time had just run out. Without hesitation, Vasquez gave the order. Burn them. The human fleet unleashed hell. Precision strikes ripped through the Varaks' warships before they had time to raise their shields. Explosions lit up the dark void, debris scattering as one ship after another was torn apart. Human ground troops deployed in drop pods, smashing into the planet's surface like falling meteors. The Varaks were caught completely off guard. They had expected an easy raid. Instead, they had invited the wrath of a species that did not forgive, did not forget, and did not negotiate with monsters. The battle was swift and brutal. Human soldiers, armed with the latest weaponry reverse-engineered from Selvar technology, moved through the Varaks' strongholds like a storm of vengeance. Prisoners were freed, their shackles shattered. The Varaks, realizing too late that they had underestimated their enemy, attempted to flee. But Vasquez had already anticipated this. As the last Varaks ships tried to escape, hidden human warships decloaked, cutting off their retreat. The Varaks were encircled. There would be no escape. A transmission came through from the Varaks leader, a grotesque being with metallic plating fused to his skin. His voice was filled with panic. "Human commander, we surrender. We." Vasquez cut the transmission. No mercy. Not this time. The final human strike hit the Varaks mothership, tearing it apart in a brilliant explosion. What remained of their fleet was reduced to burning wreckage, drifting lifelessly in space. The war was over before it had even begun. As the smoke cleared, Vasquez stood at the viewport of her ship, watching the remnants of the Varaks burn. "They thought we were prey," she said quietly. They were wrong. Humanity had not just won another battle. They had sent a message. To every empire, every warlord, every would-be conqueror in the galaxy. Mess with humanity, and you won't live to regret it. The wreckage of the Varaks fleet still drifted in the void, silent remnants of a battle that had ended in total annihilation. Humanity had struck with ruthless precision, proving once again that they were not a species to be trifled with. But war had a way of echoing across the stars, and humanity's latest victory sent ripples throughout the galactic frontier. Some species watched with growing fear, others with admiration, and a few with a deep and simmering hatred. In the cold abyss beyond the known territories, an ancient enemy stirred. They had observed humanity's rise in silence, waiting, calculating. They had watched the fall of the Excelver, the retreat of the Thraxans, and now the obliteration of the Varaks. Humanity was proving to be more than just a nuisance. They were becoming a threat, and threats had to be eliminated. The first sign of the coming storm arrived not with warships or battle formations, but with silence. Across the galaxy, human outposts and colonies began going dark. Communications cut off. Entire settlements disappearing without a trace. At first, Earth Command suspected isolated attacks, perhaps remnants of the Varaks or opportunistic warbands trying to test humanity's defenses. But as the pattern continued, the grim truth became clear. This was not random. This was something else. General Vasquez stood in the war room aboard the Indomitable, her eyes locked onto the flickering map of missing colonies. Each red marker represented a settlement lost without a single distress signal. Admiral Reed shook his head. This isn't a conventional attack. No wreckage. No bodies. Just nothing. Vasquez exhaled slowly, her mind racing. An enemy that doesn't leave a trace. She turned to Lieutenant Hale, one of the best intelligence officers in the fleet. "I want every surveillance probe, every deep space scan focused on these locations. We need to know what's happening before we lose another colony." The search yielded nothing, until one probe, stationed near the abandoned colony of New Anchorage, caught something. A shadow. Something vast, drifting just beyond visible space. hidden from conventional sensors. It didn't register as a ship. It wasn't on any known database. But the moment the probe locked onto it, the signal cut out. It was no accident. Something had seen the probe. Something had removed it. Vasquez clenched her fists. We're not dealing with raiders. This is something far more advanced. The enemy had revealed its presence, but not its identity. Not yet. A decision had to be made. Humanity could wait, keep their forces defensive, and risk losing more colonies. Or they could strike first, dive headfirst into the unknown, and confront whatever was lurking in the void. Vasquez didn't hesitate. We launch an expeditionary force, she ordered. We take a fleet into the dead zone and find out what we're dealing with. Reed nodded. And if they don't want to talk? Vasquez's voice was cold, unwavering. Then we make them regret ever looking in our direction. The fleet assembled within hours, warships armed with humanity's most powerful weaponry. The Indomitable led the charge, flanked by carriers, destroyers, and newly developed stealth corvettes equipped with experimental cloaking technology. They entered the dead zone where the colonies had vanished. And then they found it. A massive structure, larger than any known space station, floating in the void like a sleeping giant. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a planet. It was something in between, an immense construct of shifting metal and pulsating energy. And it was waking up. The moment the human fleet entered range, the station reacted. Hundreds of ships detached from its surface, sleek, silent, and utterly alien in design. They moved with eerie coordination, as if they were not separate entities, but extensions of the same intelligence. A deep droning signal filled every human ship, invading communications with an unintelligible message. It was neither a threat nor a greeting. It was a warning. Then the enemy attacked. The alien vessels moved like shadows, weaving through space at impossible speeds, their weapons bypassing conventional shields as if they weren't even there. Human ships returned fire, but something was different. The enemy was learning, adapting. Each volley that missed was recalibrated for the next attack. Each destroyed ship gave the others more information, making them harder to hit. For the first time since the war with the Excelver, humanity was outmatched. Admiral Reed cursed as one of their destroyers was torn apart in seconds. They're too fast. We need to retreat. But Vasquez shook her head. Retreat meant giving them more time to hunt human colonies, more time to win. No, she said, we hit them where it hurts. Her mind raced through the possibilities. These things were intelligent, learning at an unnatural speed. But intelligence had a flaw. It could be overwhelmed. Order all ships to fire in unpredictable patterns. No formations, no standard tactics. Hit them like we're chaos itself. The fleet obeyed. The rigid precision of the alien ships faltered. They had adapted to predictable attacks, but humans were never predictable. They were wild, irrational, impossible to fully anticipate. And that was their greatest weapon. The tide began to shift. Human warships tore through the enemy's ranks, disrupting their eerie synchronization. What had once seemed like an unstoppable force was now vulnerable. But just as victory seemed within reach, the construct awakened fully. A pulse of energy rippled outward, shutting down human sensors, freezing ship systems for a brief, terrifying moment. And then it spoke. Not in words, but in raw, unfiltered thought. We are the architects. You were not meant to exist. The human fleet hung in silence, weapons ready but frozen by the sheer magnitude of what they had just heard. Humanity had spent years proving itself against empires, warlords, and monsters. But now, they faced something far older, something that had been watching since the beginning, something that did not believe humans should be here at all. General Vasquez narrowed her eyes. She didn't care how ancient they were, how powerful they thought they were. Humanity had fought for its place in the galaxy before, and it would do so again. Even if this time, they were fighting against the architects of reality itself. The void trembled as the massive construct, the so-called architect, fully awakened. Energy surged across its immense form. An intelligence beyond comprehension now aware of the human fleet's presence. The eerie voice still echoed in their minds. You were not meant to exist. The words weren't a threat. They were a statement of fact, a verdict, a decision made long before humanity had ever left its homeworld. On the bridge of the Indomitable, General Vasquez stood motionless, her fingers tightening into fists. Around her, the war room was filled with silent officers, their faces pale. Admiral Reed finally broke the quiet. That's it, he growled. Not a warning, not a negotiation, just you don't belong. A pulse of energy rippled outward from the construct, washing over the fleet like a tidal wave. Alarms screamed as systems flickered. Shields collapsed. Weapons powered down. Communications cut to static. The Indomitable shuddered, its lights dimming. The entire fleet had been rendered helpless in an instant. The architects weren't just another alien race. They were something else. Something ancient. Something with power far beyond anything humanity had encountered before. A deep rhythmic hum vibrated through space as the alien fleet regrouped, no longer acting as individual ships, but as extensions of a single entity. The message was clear. This battle was already over. Vasquez refused to accept that. Even as the bridge was bathed in red emergency lights, even as the screens displayed their inevitable defeat, she did not break. We're still breathing, she muttered. That means we're not done yet. She turned to Lieutenant Hale. Do we still have manual controls? The lieutenant's hands flew over the darkened consoles. The automated systems were dead, but, yes, Mom, we have some functionality. But it won't be enough to fight them. Vasquez nodded, her mind racing. We don't need to fight. We need to disrupt. She turned to Reed. We need to break their coordination. Whatever they are, they're synchronized. They're fighting like a hive mind. Reed frowned. And how do you disrupt a hive mind that thinks faster than we do? Vasquez's eyes burned with determination. We confuse them. She activated her ship's last operational relay and spoke to the entire fleet. Listen up. Every ship, fire at will. No formations, no precision. Go wild. Aim at random targets. Shift unpredictable. Make them chase shadows. A moment of hesitation. Then, the human fleet erupted. Not in structured volleys, not in calculated tactics, just chaos. Ships fired wildly, sending unpredictable bursts of energy in every direction. Some launched decoy flares, others changed speeds erratically, others spun, rolled, and acted like madmen. And the architects hesitated. Their perfect synchronization wavered. Their flawless formations stuttered. They had adapted to traditional combat, to logic, to order. But humans were not logical. Humans were instinct and emotion and unpredictability wrapped in flesh and steel. And that was something the architects had never accounted for. For the first time, the alien fleet staggered. Vasquez didn't waste the moment. All ships, prepare for hyperspace jump. Hale's fingers flew over the console. Ma'am, they've locked down our drive. We need time to bypass. Vasquez turned to the viewport, staring at the massive construct. There was only one way to buy time. We're ramming them, she said. Reed's eyes widened. That's suicide. Not for all of us. Vasquez set her jaw. The Indomitable will break their hold. The rest of the fleet escapes. Silence. Then Reed stepped forward, squaring his shoulders. If you think I'm letting you do this alone, you don't know me at all. One by one, officers stood, silent but firm. No one was abandoning this fight. Vasquez smiled. Then let's make history. The Indomitable surged forward, engines burning at full power. The architects, still struggling to adapt to the sheer insanity of human tactics, didn't react fast enough. The massive warship slammed into the construct, unleashing every remaining weapon in a single devastating blast. The universe seemed to shatter. The construct reeled, its energy pulsing wildly, its hold over the fleet momentarily severed. That was all the time they needed. Jump, jump, jump. The human fleet vanished into hyperspace, escaping into the unknown, just as the Indomitable was swallowed in a blinding explosion. Then, silence. The architect construct drifted in the void, its once perfect symmetry now broken, a deep scar running along its surface. For the first time in countless eons, it had been damaged. A single human warship had wounded something that was supposed to be unkillable. The architects did not feel fear, but they did understand something new. Humanity was not a mistake. Humanity was a problem. And problems had to be eliminated. Far away, in the depths of space, the survivors of the human fleet watched as the stars streaked past them. Vasquez was gone. The Indomitable was gone. But humanity had survived. And if there was one thing history had proven, it was this: humanity never stopped fighting.